All right. All right, Prime Minister, you are audible.
Okay, great. I'll take a few POIs through voice. The truth in this world is that many things are not in our control. We can't control things that other people do. We can't control the weather. We can't control, for example, what will happen on a certain day and what order things will happen in. And this is the bottom line of our case. We want to argue that because you cannot control everything, we benefit people by having them love the process, by having them knowing that because you cannot control everything, you should love the fact that fate itself puts you in a position of where you're at. We think it is most important for individuals to love their life and to love where they're at than to be constrained by things like grief, to be constrained by the bad things that happen in your life that you thought you could control, but you never could. A few points of framing before argumentation. One, on why the life of individuals is better and how we benefit them. And second, about how you feel good about the process of pursuing things as opposed to the result. But first, a couple points of framing. The first thing I want to note clearly is that there is a difference between attributing everything to fate and accepting your fate. We have to defend anything that happens on our side of the house as you attribute it to fate, but not blindly accepting everything that happens as fate and not changing anything about it. So, for example, you can believe that something bad is fated to happen, but you can also believe that you're fated to learn from it and that you're fated to improve it or change your current circumstance from that bad thing. So we believe that it is not just a blind acceptance of everything that happens in your life and no change. But secondly, on their side, the comparative is probably going to prevent you from doing things better because as things happen to you, you categorize them into the unnecessary bad events and the good events that made your life better. Whereas on our side of the house, we think all events make your life better because it is part of the completeness that it was what your life should be. So on their side of the house, they're more likely going to be like caught back by grief and just keep reliving all the traumatic events that happen in your life because they categorize them into the bad events within your life. The first argument then is on why the life of individuals and how we benefit them on our side of the house. The premise here is a few things. The first is that the bad things and good things that happen to you are really not in your control for a couple of reasons. One is because you're an individual in a world of 8 billion people, and things that happen to you are a result of a complex chain of causes and effect, and in the end, it always comes back to you. So only if you, even if you try to change things like within your life, you can only change them marginally. So for example, you may be able to impact, for example, how much water you drink in a day, but the production of water and the sort of complex processes that mean what quality of water you're drinking or like where you're drinking from cannot be changed by you. This means that on either side of the house, a lot of things that happen to you are just not in human control. So for example, where you are born can't be controlled. The fact that an earthquake might have happened in your village also cannot be controlled. But the third thing I want to note is that the biggest encounters in your life are probably not events in your control. So for example, you probably cannot control who you meet and who you marry. So your wife or your husband is probably not just one of the things that you just control and just know who you meet. You're able to select them, but that does not mean that you're able to control the amount of people that you're going to conduct a selection on. On both sides of the bad and good things that happen to people are going to be pretty much the same because every individual is going to experience a balance of bad things and good things. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
Yeah, even if there are situations that you can't control, note that this philosophy applies to all situations, even the ones that you can control.
We're going to argue that you cannot control any situation, that all situations can go wrong. There's nothing that you have full control over. So on our side of the house, we would argue that in the majority of situations, subscribing to this philosophy is better than not subscribing to it. So why then is this philosophy beneficial? For a few days. For a few things. The first thing to note is that you're better able to avoid the negative emotions that are the aftermath of tragic events in your life. We are not saying that you don't react to super tragic events. Rather, you might react for a short while, be angry for a week, but in the long run on our side of the house, we do not revisit it and try to figure out what went wrong. Internally, humans always blame themselves on what went wrong because you know yourself best and you blame your own actions. So if your kid died in a car crash, you spent nights just revisiting the car crash and thinking about why you chose to make your kid go out and drive a car, why you accepted the fact that they could have gotten a driver license, why you thought they were responsible, and you believe that all these things are a result of your own actions. This causes a negative cycle of self-blame where you completely just regret all your choices, in which you just continually think about what went wrong and why it is your fault. So on their side of the house, they're stuck in an internal guilt trip in which every single day that passes by, you believe that you are the reason why you're failing. You are the reason why bad things happen in your life. On our side of the house, the Amor Fati philosophy is a natural counteracting mechanism. If your child dies in an earthquake, both sides are sad for a year, but on our side of the house, you don't keep revisiting it and saying it is my fault. I should have been the one that survived. I could have done things better. On our side of the house, it helps you move on because you attribute it to faith and you accept that everything happens for a reason. So you're more likely to move on and not be stuck in a negative cycle of self-guilt. But second, it also counterbalances the absurdity of events that happen. So it's not just tragic and overcoming like tragic events, but also that because just everything in life is pretty random. So the sense of direction is hugely meaningful on our side of the house. On their side of the house, they have no sense of direction because every time something does not go to like in the way that they want it to go, they like blame themselves and blame what they could have been in their control because they have a like vaguely stressed sense that everything is in their control. Whereas on our side of the house, because things just probably won't happen as you want them to happen, you have a sense of direction in that you believe that all these things are making your life a more fulfilling experience. But finally, human beings are very stressed over trying to micromanage everything that goes on in their life. This is why the biggest anxiety is trying to anticipate what happens tomorrow for things like college, like what college you'll get into, or what work, like what job offer you're going to get. But on our side of the house, you're more stoic about whatever, like what is to come. So you say that, for example, I'm working hard. So as long as I work hard, anything that happens is going to be what is best for me. You feel less stressed about needing to micromanage so you can prepare for the best future because you believe that whatever future is going to come to you after you have worked a certain amount, it is a good future for you and it makes your life more fulfilling. So on our side of the house, after you turn in your college applications, you don't stress about like what college you're going to get into and like whether or not you have done everything perfectly. On our side of the house, you accept that you have done the best that you can, that after submitting the application, everything now is down to faith. This argument has an immense impact because you feel a more fulfilling life no matter what situation, even the situations that you feel that you can't control. The second argument is about how you feel good about the process of pursuing things in the first place. On their side of the house, you need to distinguish things that you can't control versus things that you can control. So people buy into the illusion that the things that you can control, like that you can control certain things that you cannot control. So for example, people oftentimes buy into the illusion you can control like how well you work at your job, whereas this is oftentimes determined by a like wide variety of factors, like for example, who you're working with, like the events in your boss's life or the events in your coworker's life. So all these things happen in a complex network of change that we've already characterized in the first argument, which is that when the people believe that they can control something and then have a bad result or a bad outcome from it, it is immensely damaging on their side of the house. On our side of the house, you make no distinction between the bad events and the good events because you accept all events as they happen. So people focus not on the outcome of doing things, but on the process of doing things. This is immensely beneficial because on their side of the house, they believe that the outcome of doing something is the most important thing, and they attribute the happiness, like all of your happiness from doing that thing, to the outcome. But on our side of the house, you focus on the process. You focus on how hard you work every day. You focus on the smiles that you get your coworkers from walking into your company every morning. On our side of the house, you focus on the process of working. You focus on the process of doing something that you love or you don't love, and you believe that that is intrinsically more valuable than whatever outcome in things like numbers and things like a salary that you get on our side, on their side of the house. For all these reasons, we're incredibly proud to stand for the side that loves life.
All right, thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech. Now I call upon Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hi, hello. Let me just set up my timer real quick. And I hope we have a very productive debate. Hi, for transparency, I'm just going to untangle my earphones. So if I take a while, it's because of that, sorry.
All right.
Hi, okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I take my POIs through chat. However, I will be taking one in the middle of my speech. So yeah, just interrupt me. I hate that I'm here because I need college credit. I should not have to pay $100 just to even be considered for colleges. And this is what pushes me to try and change something about it. First, two responses to the main battle cries of GOP so far. First, the rallying call was just we can't control everything. First of all, Chair, you can't let them get away with how their framing is in the most convenient place of this motion. Most of their examples are being upset about the weather, about stepping in poo, about minor inconveniences in life. Note that nobody gets traumatized by getting rained on. Most of the time, people get to shrug this off or at most get pissed. You don't need Amor Fati to move on from the weather. Second, note how such complacency is very harmful because even if everything's not in control, almost all of our situations are created and caused by other people around us. Poverty is caused by corruption. Assault happened because there's an evil people out there. The fact that you make people feel as if they have to make this a valuable or purposeful thing makes you lose this debate because you disenfranchise actors that shouldn't feel obliged and feel happy about it and think that they'll learn something from it. Second response, they tell you that you are better able to control the negative emotions, and they give you an example about being in a car crash and feeling negative emotions. Take note that when you get in a car crash, you literally get traumatized, and trauma is a natural response to pain. You don't need Amor Fati, and most of the time when you try to heal with Amor Fati, it results in even worse conditions because when you use Amor Fati to try and convince yourself that you're fine, that what was happened was meant to happen, and you're supposed to learn from a car crash, you're literally putting a band-aid solution on the problem. This makes you way less likely to try and seek professional help or even see a therapist because you feel as if you've healed from it internally, even though you haven't, even though you're still unintentionally hurting people because you've convinced yourself enough that you've moved on from it, even if you really haven't. More on this later. Let's move on to our characterizations that got greatly missed in the debate. First, what does the philosophy even look like? The way in which you make something good or necessary is through making people think that what they're going through is valuable regardless of size, regardless if it's trauma or if it's abuse. This means to say that when you tell these people that your trauma should make them more resilient or stronger, this means that they should get something positive out of it, or even if it hurt them, because this is the way to make something necessary, right? To give value to it, to tell them that it had to happen, that it had to have a purpose, that this is what the status quo is meant to be, regardless if it's a very, very big systemic problem that you're undergoing in your everyday lives. Where does it even apply? It applies in most of society, like workplaces where your bosses tell you that you have to accept salaries below the minimum wage because you were just starting your way up. In schools wherein they tell you that it's normal to stay up until 4 a.m. if you have exams because it will make you more fit for jobs a few years from now, when in reality, people should not be complacent of these harmful norms. This means to say that people become more complacent with tolerating these societal problems, which brings me to our first argument. Let's talk about how harmful this philosophy is in the status quo. First reason, being mad about your destiny is a stronger push to change it rather than romanticizing and being content about your status quo and not being complacent. We prefer the world where people feel empowered to take control over their fate and be empowered to see their situations not as permanent, because when we support this philosophy, it just tells us, oh, it's okay to be happy with all the things happening because that's part of life anyway. It's for your growth, it's for your development or your own good. As a result, we become complacent with our current status because we see it as fated, that we're poor because it's meant to be like that we're sick because it's meant to be like that being discriminated as a gay woman or a gay man is because that's just how life is supposed to be, and that will make you stronger. Note how this manifests in people on the ground wherein we have to talk to them and they see poverty and discrimination and hunger as part of their lives, and this manifests in them thinking that all they can be is that, and that the system will no longer change. This is horrible because one, it disincentivizes people to vote for someone who they can trust and hope to change their lives. Second, this discourages people from joining in discussions and people from being angry about the system and protesting against it. I'll take that point.
What is the upshot of your case? A person hates the fact that their school makes them stay up until 4 a.m. What do they do next?
That's an amazing POI because I'm about to answer that in our second line of analysis. This is what makes people stay in horrible situations and try to change something about it. When you romanticize struggle, you burden people to try and make the most out of their situation, even if they are not in the right headspace to do so, or even if they feel terrible that they had to go through that and someone just tells them, don't worry, it's better to make you stronger. In return, this takes us away from the real causes of the problems. We don't get to point out the root cause of poverty when it's not even seen as a valid problem in the first place, when the plight and the inequality of the status quo is seen seen as unnecessary, when people see that this is something that we have to change because so many people are going through that so many people are incontent with their lives, then this is the only point in time where people feel as if they actually have to do something about it. Because when you tell the poor that what they're going through is like necessary or like you should romanticize or make the most out of it, then people won't even feel compelled to actually change something about it because people are already happy. What more can we do? So even if God says that Amor Fati becomes the only consolation to these poor people, that they can romanticize their fate and find happiness in the smallest things, this benefit falls flat when what we can give you concretely is catharsis and a reason to change the system. It's not acceptable to be complacent and settle for less because it means that you allow people to continuously trample on your right to a better living. We think people should be allowed to be mad about the hardships in their life and do something about it and feel something that they can do something with that fit of anger or strong emotion. And as said earlier, this is why most people feel as if they are fine how they are. This is why people refuse to take medication for their mental health conditions. But the moment in time that you feel as if this is a problem that you have to solve, that you're feeling anxious because you know that this is something that you need to get away from, this means that this is the point in time you try to seek a therapist. You try to say that something is wrong with me and this is not meant to happen. I'm going to go see a therapist and they're going to give me medication. But the more that you romanticize it, you're not going to get that. Take note that this point alone already engages with the bulk of their case. Let's look at the impacts here. On a larger scale, this means that this is what rich people use to keep the poor working in poor working conditions, to continuously exploit them in the status quo. When these rich people can simply tell their workers that, oh, you're just incontent with your life status, they have a free pass to skip over providing living conditions for their workers. In turn, people have to be content with what's given to them right now, even though they know that this is not what they're supposed to be going through. Moving on to our second argument, and Danny will greatly expand on this in her case later. First and only reason that can greatly already let go take this case. One, it is not true that all suffering and loss is necessary. 3 points of analysis. One, you don't have to have experienced bullying and harassment of a child to gain mental strength. You don't have to undergo trauma to be a successful right now. Two, moreover, I think it's okay that people wish that these things didn't happen to them, which I don't think happens on your side, because when people see this suffering as something that has done them good, we think that people are less likely to protect their children and other people from experiencing the same harms. Three, I think the people who are able to derive meaning from these experiences will still be able to get meaning from it regardless of this motion through things such as introspection and reflection. What we do on our side is we don't pressure people to view these traumatic events as something that was good for them. We don't keep people from getting angry at their abusers. We do not support a philosophy that is being pushed to all people regardless of their circumstances, when it is only really applicable in a set amount of circumstances. For all these reasons and more, oppose.
All right, thank you, Leader of All. Now I call upon Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah.
Hi, can you still hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. I want to clarify something at the top of my speech. Side proposition is not the side that is complacent. It is not the side where people do not want to change things. If anything, we're the side that tries to improve people's lives and see lessons in every event that happen under our side, right? The problem on the side up is that they basically assert that people will go fight. They make a logical leap. They say people think things are unfair, and therefore they rise up and they change things in their life. But they never prove like that was true. And Stephanie POI'd them about it, but they just went around the question and never really responded to it. Here's why they never actually fight these things on their side. The reason why you never fight them is twofold. The first thing to know is that we already told you in framing that people are more likely to internalize problems than to externalize them. So when you face racism, or when you are in structural poverty, what you're told by the elite in your country, what you're told in the media, it is your fault that you're poor. It is that you are not hardworking enough. So you're more likely to listen to societal dogma. You're more likely to listen to people around you than you are just take up your arms, take up yourself, and go and fight in this society, because people around you are like to blame you for your own issues. So internalization is more plausible than their abstract imperative of you suddenly rising up against all odds and fighting that entire society. But the second thing I want to know as to why internalization is also more likely is because a lot of these individuals are going to gradually become desensitized. What I mean by this is that when you face racism, racism is not likely to be the only issue you face. You're also likely to be poor because of structural disenfranchisement. you're also likely to feel discrimination in other parts of identity. What that points to is that individuals, when they face bad events, often face an accumulation of these events. The problem on the other side is that when you see these events as like just random and arbitrary, you see no point in fighting them because these things just stack up and gradually you become desensitized to it, right? They just kind of assert on the other side this won't happen and people will feel the same emotion, but this isn't true. If I face racism every single day, if I see no point in me seeing everything these things, if I think life is fundamentally unfair, I'm more likely to stay at home and I'm more likely to just sit in my bed and not do anything because I'm just desensitized to all these problems happening to me than I am to rise up against all odds. I think on our side, when you recognize these things are not random, then it's just not just like a random pile of events that happen to you. That's when you actually feel anger. That's when you feel like your individual instance of you facing that discrimination like propels you to join a social movement group, for example, and bring actual change to society. When things happen for a reason, that is when individuals act. When things are random, when they're just arbitrary, people see no significance in these events. And that's why even on their side, the sentiment of anger is a short-term one that gradually dissipates when you see no point in fighting these things anyways, right? That's the first thing I want to know at the top of my speech. But the second thing I want to know is that we also don't have the burden on the prop to prove why bad things need to happen to individuals. Obviously, it is better if no bad things happen to anyone on earth. But the sad truth is that for most individuals, life is often very, very harsh. So what we need to prove is why for these individuals in their subjective instances, it is better for them to view life through a positive lens than to see it in an angry, jailous way. Because in most of these instances, if they're not able to change anything, at least on our side, they can find joy in mundane things that on their side they do not find joy in. Okay. Given this, I want to ask two questions in this speech. The first thing I want to ask is how do we improve our lives and how do we make sure that we can tear down things like structural barriers? And the second thing I want to talk about is how we diminish things like mental health problems and how we incentivize people to like seek help, right? So firstly, let's talk about the things that they talk about, right? Like some things are unacceptable and you should not like be happy about these things. I have like broadly three responses. The first I want to point out is that we don't have to accept everything that happens to us. Amor Fati only allows prop to requires us to say that like you must think that fate is a good thing, that these things happen for a reason, but it's not to say that these things are acceptable. So there's a difference between saying that like I experienced this individual instance of racism happening to me and that will have a reason for it, and saying that like these things are perfectly acceptable. Like we absolutely don't have to defend this, right? We can still criticize structural barriers, we can still criticize a overtly racist society, but at the same time, we can think that these individual experiences that I am facing can propel me to join a social movement group, can propel me to do something about these issues, can make me experience the full extent of the harm that's happening, and actually incentivize me to fight. I think this is a perfectly reasonable thing for prop to defend, and it's unclear to me as to why we cannot defend this in this debate. But the second thing I want to point out is that their case exclusively works in cases where you can change the situation. In cases where you cannot change anything, where unfortunately you were born into a country that is extremely conservative and extremely pitted against you, their case has no solvency. Because if you're not able to change things, on the other side, you base your happiness on the consequences and on the base value of actions. So if you're not actually able to create change in your country, on the other side, you can never find happiness. And if you're stuck as a poor individual who is like literally in destitute poverty in countries that do not care about you, they have no solvency for these individuals. On the other side, for most individuals on earth who unfortunately do not have social mobility, who do not have the luxury of having a very good life, even if they do not have a way out, we allow them to view success and joy on a relative level. We allow them to see that these things still have meaning and to find joy in things like having your family around you, for example, or finding joy in incrementally being better and standing up to racism, right? I think this is far better than on the other side, where each time you feel angry about an action, you try to change things, but when you're eventually not able to do so because like society is more powerful than you and everything else, you're not able to find any joy in these situations, you can only feel anger, right? Here's the comparative. Racism is obviously bad, right? But if you cannot change things on either side of the house, at least on the other side, you can find some positive aspects of it. You can view life in a positive lens, you can improve your situation. On the other side, feeling negative emotions about negative things is worse than feeling positive emotions about negative things. I think it's pretty obvious weighing, so we win on this on the our side, right? But secondly, why do people speak out more on their side? Because they seem to run this kind of analysis on our side. Nobody speaks out because you just think that like these issues are acceptable, so you're never going to like actually speak out about this issue and you're going to internalize them, right? I think this is fundamentally untrue because on our side, when things happen to you and you think that there's a meaning in it, you feel more of an urge to talk about it with people. You feel more of an urge to discover what that meaning was and to talk to people to figure out how you can improve your life. And it's on the other side when every single event seems absurd and banal and random, they do not need a need to talk to other people because you think this happens to everyone. And because everything is so random, there's nothing to change anyways because I'm still subject to that invisible power that controls my life. So they do not speak out on their offside, we speak out more. But furthermore, I think we have more mechanisms to speak out, right? People around you are also like to experience these events, and the point at which you all want to find out the meaning of these events, you're all more like to form a community and talk about these things rather than just hide them and internalize them as people do on the other side of the house. But lastly, what do they not respond to? I think the biggest strand of our case that they do not respond to is that people enjoy the process more and they stress themselves less about consequences. Because look, when under our side, people trust fate and think that these events are going to turn out to be good and later on in their life in the long term, this necessarily means that there's no more point in worrying about tomorrow. There's no more point in thinking about what will happen to me in 1 or 2 years because these things are left up to fate anyways. What does matter under our side is the process of how you get to these things, because given that consequences are basically determined by fate under our side, the only thing that you have in your control is something that you value, right? It is a process of getting friends. It's a process of making college applications, learning through these things that happen in life. While on their side, when everything happens to you, you never take the lessons out of them because you think there's just random things that happen to you because of the virtue that you're just a human being. So for these reasons, we have a positive outlook on life. We allow individuals to, even if they are complacent, find joy in simple things. And for that reason, I am proud to propose.
All right, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. Now call upon Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
All right. Can you? I'll just fix my devices. It's echoing, sorry. Hello? All right, I'll just set up my devices. Oops, I'm glitching, hold up. Hello, am I both seen and heard?
Yeah, you're audible and visible.
All right. Setting up my time recorder. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniela, Dani for short. My pronouns are she, her. I take my POIs via chats. I'll take one in the middle of my speech, so no need to badge because I'll give you time anyway to raise your point. And I hope you have a wonderful and productive debate this afternoon. When people protested for women's suffrage, they didn't see the joy in the inequality. They felt sad, they felt angry, they felt mad for so many things that pushed them to lobby for change. They didn't see that being abused is part of life and that they should be complacent because they have to see that these experiences, that these sufferings are necessary and that they're good and they have to get something positive out of these terrible experiences. Responses then. Firstly, you cannot let them get away with a convenient framing of being with your family because it's not our burden to defend being in content with your life. We still accept that people will be content with what they have, but they get catharsis only on op. That's what they said, right? From DPM, they told us that positive emotions make you change things in your life, but know that most people going through trauma can force themselves to be happy about the things happening in their lives. Note that in order to be happy about something, you have to go through so much healing in order to be genuinely glad about it. Now, faking happiness means what government wants to push is a placebo effect then. But secondly, they tell us that you're not in control, so you have to accept that everything is fated because you can't change as much anyway. First, this is a very harmful belief because of the following structural reasons. That A, this makes people be complacent about their situations that are caused by the people who hold power and authority over them because you tell them necessarily that they are meant to be that way and it is what it is. But B, that this makes people then not have any form of active incentive to dream more and expect more and ask for more because you already glorify their current situations as something that's meant to happen anyway. But secondly, even if everything is not in their control and they have to be satisfied, we still don't support this philosophy insofar as you tell people that they cannot do anything, that you essentially make these people even feel more, even feel less hopeful. You make them feel as if they can no longer do anything about it. And this translates into their, for example, participation in societies and in democratic processes, wherein they feel as if they have no power anymore, that they're unlikely to vote and hope for a change and better leaders, since you shoved down to their throats that they have no longer power over these things and there are hopeless cases. But thirdly, you tell us that you believe that everything is your fault, that you're being helped to move on because everything happens for a reason and there's no guilt tripping in proposition's world. First thing to say here is that this is completely untrue, because just because you don't necessarily blame yourself, just because you don't see it as something necessary. For example, people blame themselves because of the very thing that PM tells us, that everything happens for a reason. That when we tell people that everything happens because of a reason or for a reason, you tell people to some extent that they caused that incident, that they are part of the reason for that terrible and horrendous experience. This is terrible in that you have a likelihood then of blaming the victims. And so first you have to tell them necessarily, for example, the victims of assault and harassment, that there's a reason behind that problem. But secondly, note that not everything happens for a reason, for the very examples and frames PM told us. That natural disasters happen not because you have to be bolder, but because you happen to be residing in a natural disaster prone area, for instance, and we don't coerce people to believe in the narrative that they have to be resilient, that they have to be united, that they have to feel something positive and good out of these very traumatic experiences that maybe cost their lives or cost the lives of their loved ones. Onto the weighing them. Even on Prop's best case, wherein people will be inspired because they see these things as fated, I would just want to flag, no, they were very convenient by saying that they don't have to defend a world wherein people accept all that's happening to them. But note that this is us already engaging on their best case and being charitable unlike them. This is still terrible for the most vulnerable actors. Our LO already clarified. The people who had to be abused and harassed and suffer in the status quo. Because note that when we support this philosophy, you force them to feel happy and good. And because you look at the info slide, you tell them that these horrible experiences should be good, should be necessary for them, I don't know, to be a positive experience, for them to turn out stronger or braver or united. Onto my impacting and comparatives to prove why we already take this part of the debate then. But before that, I'll take a point if there's any.
Why is it better for people to internalize trauma and continue to have anger and jealousy over bad things in their lives than they being able to look at these things in a positive way? If bad things happen on either side, then clearly the ways that having a positive outlook on bad things.
Thank you so much for that, POI. But note that even if we never said that struggles will no longer exist on our side, we know that struggles and difficulties will happen on our side, but the way you do the coping mechanism on your side is to somehow force these people to some extent to create something positive out of these experiences, even if they're terrible, even if they're traumatic. That you necessarily already put an obligation to these very vulnerable individuals to feel good about what happened to them, because that's what exactly stated in the info slide, that you necessarily have to tell them that if you were abused, you probably need to be bolder, you probably need to be braver, you probably need to be a better person because of that experience, which doesn't happen in vast majority of instances. Onto my impacting then. Note that regardless of the presence of the philosophy, people who will find an experience valuable will still find that experience meaningful if they got something really positive about it, i.e. it made them stronger, braver, or more outspoken, etc. But with supporting this, you have to take note of the two following points. How does this manifest in societal systems? That A, how do people who believe in such even treat other individuals, right? Coming from LO, which remained unengaged with, you have to justify the abusive norms in institutions, in schools and workplaces, and you even force them to enjoy the process of having to live below the minimum wage, for example, or take up so much workload because they're supposed to get catharsis for that. So basically, these toxic and abusive norms and practices, you make it a norm, you make it something that people should accept and should feel as if this is what makes them a person and that they really need to experience and go through that. But even if Gov continues to push that in order to try and do something about your school, if you're happy or glad about something happening to you, then you're literally more likely to compromise your desires and demands. So on our side exclusively, when you're mad that your school lets your bully push you around, then you are less likely to be gaslighted into compromising your complaint for the bully's sake. However, when you're quote unquote at peace with that happened, then you're literally okay with letting your bully go unpunished and possibly even continuing doing the same abuse to other people, because you necessarily feel as if this experiences is somehow something that makes you as a person, is something that's really needed and you have to accept that. But secondly, how does this manifest in individual experiences and niche communities then? Note that this may also manifest in traumatic situations. In vast majority of instances, this philosophy is applicable to these situations because it's necessary for these people to have a coping mechanism, right? And they're more vulnerable and exposed then to statements from other people, from the society, to be positive about it. This looks like after harassment or assault or disasters, wherein the notion to make people think that they have to see this as a source of fulfillment, when in most cases, people who go through such shouldn't be forced to feel such. such because one, we then give people the burden to feel better about whatever happened to them. But two, we divert our attention from the real causes of the problems. But thirdly, we forget that the same water that hardens the egg softens the potato, that we don't realize that people may have experienced similar events in life, but were impacted differently. But thirdly then, on it being not true that all suffering and loss is necessary, I think it's harmful that people see suffering as something that is needed to your life. It's not necessary for you to be touched as a 7-year-old by your uncle that could have and should have been avoided. These experiences don't always provide meaning or in many cases still harm you. We on our side, we don't force people then to think that cheating in relationships are necessary to happen, and that you necessarily have to be traumatized and abused. And we tell people not to be complacent and to always expect and achieve for more. For all those reasons and more, I've never been prouder to oppose. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now I call upon Government with here.
Hi, can everybody see and hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I don't have a POI preference, so you can ask them however you want to. At the top of this speech, I just wanted to point out that opposition's entire case and subsequent rebuttals in this debate are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the motion. Amor Fati is a philosophical reaction to your current and past situations. It is a way for people to learn to understand and comprehend the things that have already happened to them in the past as they reflect on their life experiences and reflect on the different things that they have lived through. Fate only works and applies to things that have already happened in your life. For example, for something that happened yesterday, you are able to look back on it and say, the reason why these things happened and these events occurred to me is as a result of fate. That is why Amor Fati is not a philosophy that applies for your hopes for the future yet, which is why you will not use fate to explain away events that you do not even know exist, because people cannot predict the future. They are not clairvoyant. That is the most important nuance in this debate, because negative experiences that happened in the past on our side can be accepted as part of fate because it was something that is good for you, something that is necessary for your growth, but that doesn't mean that you apply that fate towards a future that hasn't even happened yet, a future that does not even exist. So if, for example, you are an oppressed person living in an oppressed situation, you will use Amor Fati to explain away the racism that has happened in your past, but that does not mean that you cannot hope that in the future, society will get less racist, that people around you will change for the better, because fate does not apply to something that hasn't happened yet. Yes, you agree that even if you work towards solving racism and that doesn't end up working out because of a variety of other factors, you are not as stressed about it because fate will mean that whatever happens does happen, but that does not mean that people blindly accept what is going on in their own lives and never try to argue for change. This applies to the entirety of opposition case that you heard so far in this debate, and it is the reason why none of their case or their rebuttals stand, because their case relies on this understanding of the emotion, no thank you, that necessarily means that just because you accept fate means that you need to accept your future as well, which is not covered by fate. Before I go on to my two clash points in this debate, first about how you galvanize social change, and second about how you make individuals more satisfied with their lives, I'll take a point.
Yeah, if you see this as necessary, why do you want to get rid of it?
You see your past experiences as necessary in the sense that they were necessary for your personal growth, but that doesn't mean that you see racism, the larger phenomena in society, as necessary for society as a whole. Amor Fati is an individual philosophy. Firstly, then, on how you galvanize social change. There are two situations an oppressed person can be in. The first is that they're in a situation they can realistically do something about. You are a woman, for example, and the form of sexism you experience is workplace harassment, and you can do something about that by going to a different workplace. The second is a situation in which you really are helpless as an individual. You are a homeless individual living in a capitalist society, for example, where you can slowly advocate for change, but that system is so much bigger than yourself matter how hard you fight, change will probably not come in your lifetime. Or Op's very own example, where you are a 7-year-old being sexually harassed by your uncle, where you probably don't understand what is going on to you in the first place, and you don't properly understand the things and the tools that you have in order to combat what you are experiencing. Those are the two situations that exist in which an oppressed person can be in. The case you heard from Op about how individuals dissatisfied with bad things in your life will fight against those things only applies towards the first situation in which they are able to fight against those things. That's when they actually have an impactful case. Otherwise, that fight is futile. The three responses that I have to their argument then is, firstly, our second speaker already explained to you why people are more likely to internalize things rather than externalize them. An African American whose job application is rejected because of subconscious racism does not know for sure whether this is an instance of oppression, because they can also choose to blame themselves and their circumstances for their situation, the fact that they didn't try hard enough. This rebuttal makes opposition's missing link in this debate very clear. They prove that people will be dissatisfied with their life on their side, but they don't prove that they will blame the dissatisfaction on the right issues on their side, which is another necessary step in terms of people actually being able to address and acknowledge the oppression that exists towards making their life bad, instead of simply complaining about the fact that their life is bad. The second rebuttal is that Amor Fati is an individual life philosophy. You apply the idea of fate to events in your individual life. You do not apply the idea of fate to society as a larger entity, because obviously if something exists in society, that is because of like bigger things in the world, such as, for example, racism existing because racists are existing. Racism, the phenomenon, is not an occurrence in your life that you are fated to experience. The individual racist event that you might experience one day is what Amor Fati applies to. This is super important because a person can acknowledge that them passing by a racist who called them a slur on the metro today was part of their fate, while also thinking that racism as a whole and the system should go away. In fact, Amor Fati then is what pushes them to deal with that racism, because they are more likely to believe that they were fated to experience that racist event today, because that is nature and fate's way of pushing them to fight against racism in society by helping them notice the prevalence of racism. So what fate does in this situation is it doesn't make people accept things, it makes people think more deeply and reflect more deeply on why things are happening to them, because they acknowledge that no matter what they themselves did, it is going to happen to them in the first place. So that's the difference in this debate, because fate exists to explain that everything that happens for a reason, but you as an individual are still there to assign that reason to the things that do happen. And in the cases of racism, people on our side are likely to assign the reason towards being things like self-improvement, which in this case means becoming a more active activist against racism. But thirdly, even if you don't buy that analysis, the biggest part of ops impacts are washed out by just bare human necessities. People have life philosophies, but more important than those philosophies is the instinct for survival. A person can have a positive outlook on life and believe in silver linings. That doesn't mean that they'll have to love their life when they are starving and not try to find a job just because they believe in positivity. So in cases of like most extreme racism or most extreme sexism, a belief in Amor Fati is still under like your basic necessities and your survival instincts. But importantly, let's talk about the second case of oppression, which is the bigger impact case, because this is the case in which a person is so oppressed they are individually powerless. This person is infinitely more vulnerable. Ops has nothing on this case, and the reason why is because their very case makes people a social battering ram in cases in which those people are unlikely to change anything in society anyways. The Amor Fati philosophy is more important than ever in these cases because it helps people deal with their oppression. The fact that even if they cannot change anything, they can still find happiness in the little things in life, and that is far more important. So for all of these reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
All right. Thank you, Government Whip, for the speech. Now I call upon Opposition Whip to get here.
All right. I take my POIs through chat. If I don't take 1 by 5, then you can raise it verbally. Yeah. Mute. All right. Sorry, just setting up my timer. Panel, the happiness that they get is fake. It is something that you convince yourself of, and is something that is not real. This type of happiness is not meaningful at all, insofar as people's psyche are probably not that strong to be able to ignore the physical pang of hunger every day. They probably cannot ignore the psychological flashbacks of the day they were harassed. Nobody is fated to be hate crime. You get more deep reflection on our side when you're angry about it, when you embrace your emotions about the situation, not when you're positive about things that shouldn't even be happening in the first place. We think it's okay to be upset about these things, and we think this is what mobilizes change in the first place. 3 questions in this debate then. Firstly, is this philosophy valid? Secondly, where do people's lives improve? Where do they believe this philosophy or not? And lastly, where are people happier? First question then on is this philosophy valid? How does proposition try to answer this question? They said that this is valid because we can't control everything. So it's better not to be upset about it and just move on. 3 problems with this. Firstly, we agree that you are not able to control everything, and that is exactly why you should be upset that you are not in control. We think that the poor people who were placed in the slums against their will because of the elites should be upset. We think a woman who was touched against her consent when she was not in control should be upset. Prompt necessary tells you to be okay with this because it's part of life and it's your fate. We think that people should seek to be in control because we don't want people to be mere slaves who are just okay with not being in control. But secondly, I don't get why being upset about something is necessarily bad in the first place. We think it's perfectly valid to be upset. You being traumatized about your family dying in a car crash is a psychological response, and it ought not to be brushed off as something that was necessary. On their side, they simply invalidate this and tell you to move on. Lastly, but sure, even if this applies to the situations they say that there is no control, it only applies to those situations where you have no control. The problem is that not all of the events in a person's life are random or out of their control. So insofar as they say that their case only applies to a limited number of cases, and it only helps people in those cases, we think the benefit that they get is very marginal because that's not all of the cases, right? We think that no one should subscribe to this philosophy because no person's life is completely out of their control, and that is why this philosophy is invalid. How did we answer this question then? We tell you that it is invalid because it only applies to certain situation and certain types of suffering and losses. So yes, it may be good and necessary for you to suffer because you're staying up all night to ace a test, but we think that the trauma you felt from someone bullying you as a child is something that is not necessary. It's extremely toxic that this philosophy extends to all suffering and losses because you tell a little girl who was abused that the abuser was actually good to them because this was fate. I think the people who are able to derive meaning from those experiences will still be able to get meaning from it regardless of this motion, right? What we do on our side is we don't pressure people to view these traumatic events as something that was good for them. We don't keep people from being angry at their abusers. We do not support a philosophy that is being pushed to all people and all of their circumstances when it is only really applicable in a set amount of circumstances. Lastly then, how did we answer this question better? We tell you that it's harmful that this philosophy that it is only true for a certain set of situation to extend to everything. We tell you that it is harmful because sure, while it is good in those situations, it is harmful that you impose this on everything and everyone because it is not applicable to them. Take note that you can't automatically force yourself to be happy. This big unrealistic illogical leap is what makes people unable to properly heal from their trauma. This means that before you make change, you have to wait until you're happy and content before you even try to push for external change. Literally, most people will refuse to even accept what happened to them because this is a normal trauma response that we told you right from LO. And when they heal, they're less likely to seek external help because they feel as if this is something that is meant to happen. That you have anxiety because fate wanted you to have it means you're literally less likely to change if it's supposed to happen anyway. You just accept it as your fate. But before I move on to the second question, any POIs?
Who is more likely to be a change maker? The person who suffered bullying as a child and believed it happened for the reason that they can grow up to fight the school bullies, or the person who suffers bullying as a child and hates it so much they try their best to forget about it and never think about it again?
I think someone who hates bullies so much will not ever forget about their bullies. They will not ever forget about the pain they experience every single day as a child. I think they're more likely to actually fight against the bullies and actually go out and protest and campaign for this sort of change, not someone who just sees this as a necessary means of growth because while they already got their benefit, they already got their growth, why would they need to necessarily eliminate bullying, right? But the second question then, where do people's lives improve? How did proposition try to answer this question? They tell you it's much better if people just don't don't get upset about things because they can only enact marginal change anyways. Two problems with this. We think that this is not necessarily true because we think that if the vast majority of people do not believe this philosophy on our side because we oppose it, this is where they're able to to collectivize and be able to protest and lobby for changes. Comparatively, when they support this philosophy where people just see that as part of their faith, they're likely to be complacent and not actually believe people who still want to push for change. So we think that on your side, social movements get much less social capital because people believe in this philosophy and do not want to necessarily help people who are still grieving from their past experiences. But secondly, even if this is true, I think that marginal change is better than no change at all. We think that people being able to go to therapy because they want to, they see that this was necessary for something that they could have avoided, it's much better than no change at all than people just saying that it is what it is, right? We don't think that's a necessary substitute for therapy. Secondly, then, how did we answer this question? We tell you that people seek change because they see this as something as unnecessary and could have been eradicated. We think note that if people see this suffering as necessary, then why would they get rid of it? Why would you get rid of something that is necessary? If on your side, people see this trauma as a necessary part of their identity, why would they ever want to get out of it? If people experience growth because of bullying, why would they want their children not to be bullied? They want their children to also grow, right? Therefore, they probably want this to use this as a tool for their growth as well. If you see it as necessary, this means that you cannot take it away. This is why they cannot claim change as symmetric on their side. But secondly, they say that this type of acceptance does not apply in the future. But we think that it is this satisfaction from the past that propels you to change the future. It is the fact that you are not okay with the racism in the past that you experienced that you want to change it so that it doesn't happen again in the future. But even if people are able to enact change on their side, I don't get why this much change insofar as people already got the benefit, insofar as people already see this as necessary, and therefore they don't want to eliminate it. But secondly, we think then the fact that people are unsatisfied and does not see this as fate and it's something that they can actually change is what pushes them to enact change and actually improve their lives. We don't want people to just be fine with the process because this means that they're fine with all of the consequences. We think we ought to fight for the best possible consequences for everyone. Why do we answer this question better then? We tell you that change is more possible on our side when the dissatisfaction is manifested in status quo, when people don't believe their struggles are the norm, when they know they should ask for more and expect for more, with people just accepting minimum wage or abuses as their personal development tool, you don't incentivize them to change this and protest. But we think that people are happier on our side because they're at least able to cope, that this is not something that is necessary on their side. They just see this as fate and something that they do not have control against. We think that is much more depressing. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Whip. Now I call upon Op reply. Here.
Hi. Let me just set up my timer real quick.
All right.
Hi, me again. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay.
Can I just drink water? Thanks. Before I start my speech, since this is the last speech of the round, I would like to shout out Ateneo, Debate, Org, and Varsity, and to our coach RK who is watching right now, and to Luigi Alcañeses. Hi Luigi, we miss you. And shout out to ASHS B and C. One big fight. Proud to be representing the Philippines. I am here because I want to change the landscape as a Filipino student in the debate world. I have not healed from this wound, and I don't need to pressure myself to, because I know that racism is not something I should live, laugh, love from. I make better change when I don't compromise my desires for a better world. I think it's incredibly convenient for Gov to say that they co-opt our benefits just because people can be positive about experiences on their side. From LO, we already told you that anger is the key mechanism to change something about your life, because that tells you that you were wronged, that you you deserve more, that this is not normal, that what you want doesn't have to be compromised for the sake of other people or for the sake of your self-healing or for this band-aid that you so badly want to put on the problems that you're going through. Onto our weighing in this debate, just so we can see how easily we win this round. First, on our worst, where people can be negative about it, we still win because coming from our LO, I already told you that this is what incentivizes people to better change the systems because they know that this is not what life should be. Just because like you went through bullying as a child and now you accept that you were supposed to be someone that changes bullying in the future, how are you supposed to know that you're supposed to change bullying in the future if you feel like it is not something that has to be changed in the first place? You can't be a change maker if you don't see it as something that is wrong in the first place. Coming from DLO, we tell you that this is valid because people should be allowed to feel their emotions and be upset and angry, which doesn't happen as much on op when you force people to make the most out of what hurt them and see this as a development tool, when in most instances abused victims cannot afford this. We protect them on our side. These two layers of structural weighing have yet to be engaged with the prop. We don't compromise our desires and battle cries when we are mad. This is exclusive on our side because when you're just happy about something happening, then you can compromise your ability to demand for change. When someone says that, oh, maybe your bully was just wronged at that time and you're trying to accept that wound of yours, you're going to compromise and say that, oh, okay, it's fine. Maybe they were mad about it. Like maybe this is what's meant to happen to them, or maybe this is what's meant to happen to me. At this point in time, your bully can literally go unscathed and like bully someone else. Let's move on to the clashes. First, where are people even better off in this debate? We think that where vulnerable individuals are protected and not burdened is better on our side. Note that prop did not engage with this at all. The only thing that they said was we are not retrospective, when in fact it's them who consider these victims as much at all, insofar as you force victims of assault to feel like their experiences coming from LO and DLO, coming from your first, you force them to grow out of it and to develop from it, because forcing yourself to be happy is not something that naturally happens, and it manifests in situations and institutions and communities when your parents tell this, when your peers practices, etc. Let's look at where people feel more hopeful and get more satisfaction. Coming from DLO, it is only on our side wherein we don't tell people that horrible experiences happen because they lack growth and that they have no control over their lives. You then just disincentivize them to participate in systems for change, i.e. voting and lobbying and protests, because coming from PM and DPM, people have to accept that they are not in control, which means that whatever the hell you do to try to change your fate, nothing's going to happen because you accept that this is something that's meant to happen anyway. Where are societies better off? Let's talk about this. Prop tells us that systemic racism is meant to happen when you realize that some people might or might not have been racist because when they did something against you or rejected your job offer, then you accepting it is better because you internally heal. Take note, Chair, that this is a huge logical leap. They can't get away with this because when you get rejected from a job offer, you aren't upset because you think it's racism. You get upset because you lost out on an opportunity for a job. Who knows that you might be at your wits' end looking for a job and you lost your only chance at it. You feel hopeless. Note that their entire case cannot fly unless they accept that you have to be mad about things. You have to be angry about things before you can heal from it in the first place. Let's look at change then. Concrete change. It's on our side where people are not actively being incentivized and told by their peers, parents, and bosses to stay where they are and be complacent. But GovWeb tells us that people should just accept whatever happens to them because that's fated, and without considering that this shouldn't even be a norm. If you want happiness to feel legit by all, side with the team where you do not have to trick yourself into feeling happy when you can heal from your internal wounds, from your child wounds, in order to actually make change and be angry and don't compromise your desires. For all these reasons and more, up next around.
All right, thank you all. Reply. To end the debate, let's have Gov reply. Yeah.
Hi, you can still see and hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. The opposition case in this debate only works if they prove people are going to interpret Amor Fati in a way in which they inflict themselves self-blame. Because look at their case. Their entire case was premised upon internalization. So when these things happen to you, you think they're good things and therefore you're not angry about them, you're not able to seek therapy. But the problem with this is that there's not a single line of analysis in their speech as to why the meaning you derive from these experiences is necessarily that this was a justified experience. We told you you down the bench, that you can equally derive meaning from them and say that this was an experience that was supposed to show me the inequality system, and that was supposed to show me that I should fight it, right? This is an equally valuable and reasonable interpretation of the emotion they never engage with. So there's no reason as to why when you're bullied, the immediate way in which you interpret Amor Fati, say I was bullied because I'm bad and therefore I deserve to be bullied. Instead, the more likely way you interpret the emotion is say that I was bullied, there was a reason for it, I'm now going to stand up to bullying, and this will make me a stronger individual. That is actually when you can improve yourself and seek therapy to the point at which you can move on from things and interpret them in a way that allows you to have a positive outlook on life. But it isn't to say that everything is necessarily going to be justified on our side. Like, I think people inherently don't want to feel bad about themselves. So when you give them this liberty and Amor Fati to interpret things in life in the way that they want to, that is when we have more liberty to express trauma and to go in life in the way we want to. What is the competitive on their side? The competitive on their side is not that you're able to interpret things in a way you want to. It is that society dictates that you have to internalize trauma. It is that you have a societal narrative that tells you that you're the ones to blame, that you're the one who didn't work hard enough. So this debate is pretty parallel because it never responds to our response, right? We told you from second, basically, that the more likely alternative on their side is that when you have anger, you internalize that anger within yourself and you still blame yourself because society tells you to, right? And they never disprove this. So at best, there are cases of wash because under both sides, you're going to internalize yourself. The benefit is that under our side, even when you internalize these problems within yourself, you can still find positive things about them. And so even then, the way up still goes under our side of the debate, right? But why do we win this debate? I think the reason why we win is because Op fundamentally misunderstands our case, right? Our case is not that people can never be upset. It is that when you are upset, people push you to be better. People push you to move on, and moving on faster is probably a very good thing in this debate. This start down the bench, the living in trauma, anger, and sadness is a good thing. But literally, why is that the case? I think intuitively, it is far better for you to seek therapy, get out of trauma and anger in a week, and then become a better individual. I think this is far better than on their side it has. But crucially, on our side, these things are still human emotions. You're still going to express them, and people are going to understand you for expressing them, but you talk about these things more because you see a meaning in them. When these things are just random shredded events that an invisible power throws at you, that's when you actually do not seek therapy. That's when you don't talk about with your community because you see no point in talking about it because there's no meaning. It's so random. On the other side, when you seek that meaning, when you try to find out what that event meant, that is when you talk to therapy. That is when you talk to individuals. That's why you try to become a better individual. That's why you try to escape that trauma, and that is why you can actually be a better individual. So for these reasons, I think we are already winning this debate. But I think the biggest push from Op also doesn't work because their biggest push is that you just accept racism and therefore you don't fight it. But we literally told you from first that there's a difference between finding meaning in an individual experience from the past and justifying the existence of an entire oppressive system. So for example, if I faced Asian discrimination in the past, I don't need to say that this was justified. I can say this had a meaning. The meaning was I now need to stand up and fight for other individuals who face the same experiences as me. This is the perfectly reasonable and more plausible interpretation of this motion. So now also you have more people fighting because you see meaning in these events. But crucially, we have less desensitization to the point in which people do not think these things are just absurd and banal things that happen to them. Instead, they see that there's something that needs to be done about these things. So that is why we win on positive change. But the last thing I want to point out is that they never engage with our positive case. We're charitable enough to engage with every one of their speakers, but it never engaged with two of our arguments. We told you that one, in cases in which change cannot be brought upon, we clearly win this debate because our case wasn't premised upon consequences. Even if you're not able to get change, we can justify things like the process. We can find happiness in little things in life. This was never engaged with. In the vast majority of the most oppressed societies on earth, when people live the most unhappy lives, are societies that are not going to change their foreseeable future. This is the biggest impact of this debate that was never responded to by their side. So we already went on a lens on this, even if everything is a wash. Secondly, we went on the average underpressed individuals. They only engage with people who have trauma, but a lot of individuals do not have trauma, and we went on them clearly because we make their lives less absurd. So for all these reasons, I am very proud to propose.
All right, let me end the recording.